So I'm actually one of the founders of Relative Insight, and I'm the CEO and also head of Insight. So, what do? We work in the ad tech world, and over the last few decades, a lot of the focus, I guess, in the ad tech world has been about targeting people, getting the adverts out to the right sort of people. What we do is very much the next step after this. Okay, you've targeted people. But what do you then say to them? What do you say? How do you say it? What language do you use? So we're all about language. We're a language company, and that's what we help brands and agencies and other organizations do. We didn't start in that area. My background is actually a researcher, and the research that I did was around online child protection. So the technologies that we originally built were to help law enforcement analyze the vast amounts of conversational data they get as part of a case. So we actually started off by developing technology to help law enforcement do this. We worked with the National Crime Agency, and actually it's actually been used worldwide. So I know for a fact that back in the day it was used by the Canadian police as part of an investigation to do with online child protection. So that's where we came from. We don't do that anymore, unfortunately. We sort of moved on, but we do take the same tech and we use it in the advertising world. And we've been quite fortunate in that we seem to have hit quite a sweet spot in that people have started to realize that language is really important for engaging. And so we now work with some of the biggest sort of brands and agencies, whether it's in London, whether it's in New York, and this has been only in a couple of years we've sort of generated this sort of client list. And again, they're all around this notion of language. They suddenly realize that language is really important. So, this is our slogan, language is insight. Language is it's a huge source of data that we all use and have, and there is plenty of insight within that. The way we speak gives indicators of our attitudes, our personality, our interests, and all this is useful information that someone can then use if they want to engage with you. Because ultimately marketing is about engagement, it's about resonating with your target audience. And that applies not just to, I guess, the advertising world, but any type of engagement you want to do with someone else. You need to resonate. So that's what we do in a nutshell. It's all about helping companies understand what language to use. So it's probably best if I give you some examples. So this is one we did a few years ago now for Olay. So Olay suffer from, I guess, being perceived as a brand that's generally used by an older demographic. Okay? And that meant they were missing out on a huge younger market. So what they wanted to do was try and tap into that. So they took their advertising and they just shoved it at 20-year-olds, and it didn't work. So they asked us to go in and try and understand why this wasn't working. So what we did is we looked at the language of 20-year-olds and the language of 50-year-olds and looked at how they talked about makeup. And one of the things that we saw, and it's only a very small thing, but it's actually really quite significant. We saw that 20-year-olds say they wear makeup and 50-year-olds say they apply makeup. It's one word, but that one word, when you think about it, actually means quite a lot, and it gives a different impression. So when you're young, you wear makeup because you're going out, you want to look good, you want to impress. Unfortunately, when you get older, you tend to get blemishes or wrinkles, and so makeup can be used for, I guess, trying to tackle these issues. So in that sense, they were applying makeup to address an issue. Okay, so Olay were telling 20-year-olds to apply makeup. They're basically saying to 20-year-olds, "There's something wrong with your face. You need to use our makeup." Okay, and it just wasn't resonating. Okay, so it's one word, but that meaning has quite a big impact. And again, it's all about resonating and speaking in the right language. Now, that's not the only thing we found out, but it's a really simple example that captures why language is really important. I've got a few others. So we did some work with Disney a few years ago. So this is when The Force Awakens was being made, and it was coming out in about 6 months. And they were getting their advertising campaign ready. And there was a guy at Disney Europe who wasn't convinced by the strategy that Disney were employing. Basically, they were having the same campaign and they're going to just use it globally. They weren't going to adapt it for different countries apart from translating it. It'll be more or less the same. And this guy felt, well, Star Wars is going to mean different things to different cultures. And, you need to, maybe we need to address that and then sort of reflect that in our marketing. So what we were asked to do was to have a look at a number of countries and fans in those countries and how they talk about Star Wars. So we looked at the UK, we looked at the US, and we looked at Australia. And we looked at how those fans of Star Wars talked. And what we saw was that in the US, they were very much focused on the primary characters, the core plot. It was very sort of black and white in a way, and crystal clear what they were talked about. In the UK, we were a little bit more nerdy, and we were interested in the sort of the subplots, the secondary characters. So instantly, we could tell Disney that actually, if you want to do a campaign for the US, you need to focus more on the big things. But actually, for the UK, you could perhaps introduce some more of the subtle elements. The subtle sort of overarching plot and the smaller characters. Well, that will also resonate with a UK audience. Interestingly, Australia was actually similar to the US, except one key difference was Boba Fett. And the reason why they talked about Boba Fett was because the actor who plays Boba Fett is a Kiwi, and so they had some connection to the fact that he was from a neighbouring country. Another example is, so this is actually not one that we did, this is actually one of our clients did this. So RGA are an advertising agency, a global advertising agency, and their New York branch have Samsung as a client. And what they wanted to do was make, the advertising they have for the different Samsung phones more effective. And what they decided to do was to look at how people who own these phones, what do they actually care about? What's their day-to-day life almost? What do they talk about in general? So they basically went onto Twitter and they did a simple thing and just searched for people who said, my Samsung Note or my Samsung S. And then from that, they could see, okay, these are the people who own this type of phone, these people who own that type of phone, and then they could see what else they talked about, what interests were. And they actually, they built two, what we call audience language models, and they were quite different. It was quite clear that people who own one type of phone generally had certain types of interests compared to another type of phone. And so what they then did was they went back, they changed their advertising content to suit each phone audience, and they also adapted who they sort of targeted it at. And as a result of that, when they reran the advertising campaign, it had a 67% improvement in qualified landing rate. Now, I'm not from this sort of world, so I don't really know what that means, but from what I understand, that's basically click-throughs. So when you see an ad and you click on it, and then you go through the process, that's what that represents. And normally, just getting a single-digit improvement is quite a big thing in the advertising world. So this was quite a big jump. And it's purely come down from the fact that they looked at the language owners of these phones used and then just tried to resonate it. Just a quick look at some others that we've done recently. So I guess the point about language and communication is that there's so many different areas in which you could apply it to. So we've done some work with DFS and Skye recently, trying to help them make their call center operators more effective. So Skye in particular are having a lot of people phoning up and cancelling, and obviously that's not good for Skye. They want to work out what can our operators say to try and convince people to stay? You know, what works and what doesn't work in terms of, you know, are you formal, are you jokey? You know, what's the right sort of language you should be using? DFS were interesting. They wanted to upsell warranties on their furnitures, but also things like footstools. In fact, footstools is one of the key things they asked us to look at. You know, how do we upsell more footstools? So, you know, again, you know, we were looking at those operators who were doing really well and those who weren't, and what was the language differences. And they could then go back and improve their training material for their operators so that they could, you know, use more effective language. We do quite a bit now with universities, because obviously universities are trying to recruit students to come and do their courses. So they need to understand, how do I, you know, what shall I say on my website or in my material to attract students to come to do my course. Okay, so again, what's interesting here is that it's not just about what teens talk about, but also the parents, because increasingly parents have quite a big say in which university teenagers are going to, so they need to understand what are the parents talking about, you know, when it comes to choosing which university or choosing which course to go on. So that's something else that we've been working on. Linked to this, actually, for both Skye and for universities, there's also another angle that we also do quite a lot of, and that is actually a lot of these people want to understand where they sit in relation to their peers. You know, so Skye in relation to Virgin Media or Netflix. You know, what are their competitors doing? How are they perceived by their markets? Likewise, universities. You know, we almost always get asked, okay, look at what people are saying about us, but then also look at our competitors and see, you know, what are they doing better that we can then change in our messaging. This final one's quite interesting. We've done quite a few like this. So the FA want to get more girls playing football. And again, you know, they need to start quite early. You need to start when girls are at school. And again, key to that is, what are the parental attitudes to girls playing football? You know, what is the resistance? What do parents encourage their girls to do rather than play football? And so they want to understand that, because they obviously want to try and break into there and get parents to think that actually it's perfectly fine for girls to play football, and you know, they need to sort of get the messaging right for that. We've done a very similar one for the IET, so the Institute of Engineers. They're finding that all the big old-fashioned engineering companies like Rolls-Royce, youngsters just don't want to go there because it's perceived as being for sort of old, middle-aged white men. Whereas all the youngsters want to go to the Ubers and the Googles and that sort of stuff. So again, how do we change the language to make it, I guess, to help them attract the right talent? So that's lots of case studies. And as I've mentioned, you know, really there's no limit to how you can apply this. And you know, these are the three pillars that we as a company currently target. So pillar one is our bread and butter and where we've sort of focused, but we're now expanding into, you know, helping companies with the sales and customer service experience. And also increasingly, there's another big area, which is internal communications and HR. You know, the big organizations do staff surveys and collect huge amounts of data, and most of the time all they care about, all they analyze really, are all the sort of ratings of 1 to 5, and all those text boxes that everyone fills in just gets discarded. But actually there's really useful insight in there. So again, we've been helping some companies understand these staff surveys and help them, you know, improve their internal communication. So that's hopefully shown why language is really important for engaging. What I'll touch on now is, okay, if you want to do this yourselves, you know, what things do you need to consider? You know, how do you get these language insights? So, really it comes down to two things. The first one, and it's a biggie, is the data. You know, there is huge amounts of data out there, and pretty much all the clients that we speak to have data that they sit on in some way. You know, they might, you know, we've got clients who, you know, they do video focus groups, and they've got like hundreds of thousands of hours of videotape that is just sitting there and nothing's being done with it. but actually it can be transcribed and then it can be analysed. There's all these different types of data, and so what we find is that a lot of companies don't really realise how much data they're sitting on that is actually a really useful source of insight. So I've listed here just some example stuff that we've sort of been involved in, but pretty much everyone likes to see how they're being discussed on social media, and all the big companies tend to have social listening tools that just listen to what's being said about them. There's reviews of products, there's just general forums and how people talk about stuff in forums. There's endless focus groups that companies will have. Companies like Disney have huge data management platforms where they just put everything into just one big platform. But again, they just don't really know what to do with it. You've got your customer relationship software, as I mentioned before, call centers. You've got these live chats when you go onto a website and you're chatting away with someone. Again, really useful data there. Surveys, blogs, websites. There's loads of language data out there. And on the other end of the spectrum, within companies, there are various roles that all have questions that they want to have answered. They want to get some insights from somewhere, and often they have the data to get that insight. They just don't know how to get it, get those insights out from it. Whether it's in the brand world, we've got marketeers, whether it's just general account managers and customer service people within organizations, whether it's your HR person. Everyone has these questions they want to sort of get insight from. So that's really, I guess, the key thing is to see what actual data assets you've already got, because you are going to have some that you can use. Not all data is equal, unfortunately, and with all types of analysis, the better the data, the better the insight that comes out. So that's one of the things that is a bit of a bane of my life, in that the data that we get to look at can vary from being really good quality data to just being ridiculously polluted, that is just you spend hours just trying to pull anything out of. So each data source, there'll always be strengths and weaknesses between different data sources. So focus groups tend to be great in that they're on topic and they're specific. However, the people who are attending them have probably been paid to be there, or they might be being given a box of chocolates or something. They're going to be saying what they think you want to hear, and they're going to be steered, ultimately by someone in the room asking the questions. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind of it. It's good data, but it's not totally sort of natural data. Blogs and news. I don't like blogs and news, mainly because you often find that the stuff you're interested in is a very small part of a much bigger data set. So that's a pain. But also, there's also the bias. The person who's writing the blog or writing the news article or the actual publication itself will probably have a leaning in some direction. Okay, and that's, again, something you've got to bear in mind. Social media is what, as I mentioned, pretty much every big brand or agency collects it, and that's really the starting point for a lot of our clients is the social media data they have. It's absolutely terrible. It's so polluted that it's pretty much useless, to be honest. So they know it. They've spent all this money on this social listening platforms, and then they get this stuff back and they just can't do anything with it. We try and help which we can, but there's loads of it out there, but it's quite polluted. So forums are normally the place that we go to for a lot of our analysis. The advantage is that the conversations, again, you can make them on topic because you know what the threads are about or the forums are about. What people write are longer bits of text, more thought out, and it's natural. There's no one steering it in any direction. It's just people normally having a rant or talking about something and just giving their opinion. So it's normally quite a good data source for just free discussion about stuff. And so that tends to be where we go to a lot of our stuff. Donald Rumsfeld, I bet you didn't expect him to appear. So this is something else that we always say to people, don't necessarily him, but he had this famous line that he mentioned in a press conference back in the Iraq war days. He said, unknown unknowns. And at the time, the press had a bit of a field day with him because they thought, what on earth does that mean? But unknown unknowns are actually a phrase used in the intelligence community. And they represent the fact that there's different types of information out there. There's the stuff that you know, and you know's out there and you already know it. There's the stuff that you know is probably out there, but you just haven't found it yet. But then there'll be the stuff that you just haven't even thought about looking for. And that's the unknown unknowns. And from a marketing point of view, the gold dust is normally in the unknown unknowns, because that normally opens up a new avenue for brands, whatever. It's stuff they just didn't know existed before. And certainly the clients who've been the most, excited with us have been those who've used us and then gone, wow, we've just found something that we never knew that our consumers talked about in relation to our product. And so these unknowns are actually really important. And key to that is this idea of discovery rather than search. So if you go off and search for something, especially on the internet, you are going to find it. If I do a search for "are Toyotas reliable?", then there will be somewhere someone who said my Toyota is really reliable. Okay, so you are going to find it. Okay, and that's one of the problems with searching, is that you're inherently biasing it because you're going to get what you search for. Okay, so it's always better to discover. And so when we're doing our analysis projects, we always go, big really, and just try and get conversations of Toyota in general, without any sort of preloading it. And then we sort of see, using our software, it'll tell us which things are coming out as being interesting from that. And that's how you find your unknown unknowns, because you don't know what to search for. So, that's how you find these golden nuggets. So, discovery rather than search. Context. This is another interesting one as well. It's amazing how many clients we see who will take some data, they'll analyze it, and that's where their insight comes from. Okay. They don't think about the fact that there could be, that data lives in an ecosystem, and there's other factors that impact on it. So let me give you a really good example. Imagine you are a mobile phone manufacturer, and you want to target millennials. Everybody wants to get their heads around millennials. No one really understands them. So, you get some language of millennials talking about mobile phones. You do the next obvious thing, which is to produce a word cloud, because everyone produces word clouds. And then you go, look, there's my word cloud, some wonderful insight. Let's go and market my stuff to millennials based on this. Okay, and that happens. We see that all the time. In fact, most of our clients, when we first meet them, that's how they work. They did look at some data, they produce an annoying word cloud, and then they go away and act upon it. Okay. What happens if you look at how Generation X talk about mobile phones? As you might expect, when you then produce the compulsory word cloud, what you find is that it's pretty much identical to how millennials talked about mobile phones. Okay. And this reflects the fact that we all speak English, in this case, and so 95, 96, 97% of our language use will be the same. We are going to say the same things, okay? So if you do look at data in isolation, and like as here, you will end up having very similar outputs coming out. So that's why understanding the context, understanding the broader picture is really important. And so what we always say is, you should compare things. And that's the obvious thing to do, is compare things. So if we compared millennials and Gen X, what you'll find actually is that there is if you take out the 95% that's just people talking about mobile phones in the same way, there will be differences. Small differences, but some differences that will come out. And so actually, we did this to Car Phone Warehouse, the very same thing. And what we found was that when you take out the commonality, what you see is that millennials, what's really important to millennials are things like battery life, the camera quality, how the phone looks. They say they go on about how beautiful the phone should be and this sort of stuff. Generation X, it was very much about customer service. They were complaining about the fact that phones these days don't come with manuals. And that's, why not? So it's this whole ease of use thing. And also they mention a lot about their kin, because a lot of these phones they're buying for their children, for their first phone, or maybe it would be, my son has bought this for me for Christmas, So it's a very different perspective on what a phone means to them. Okay? And this only came out because we're stripping out all that common language that they both talk about, and then we're seeing what is, specific to each audience, and that's the insight. That there is the interesting insight, and that tells Car Phone Warehouse, if you want to do a campaign, to millennials, focus on those bits, or Generation X, focus on those bits. So understanding the context and not just looking at data in isolation is really important. So I'm actually getting almost towards the end. This is my final slide, almost. So I think the final thing is ask the right questions. It might seem a bit strange, but actually when people go in to do some analysis and come up with a project they want to sort of look at, they don't really know what they want to find out. They don't actually understand themselves as a client what they actually want to try and answer. Okay, so they will go in and say to us, we want to find out how people are discussing my product. That's a pretty common one. Okay, and it's it's a perfectly valid question, but it's also very broad. Okay, and there's lots of that could be done in very different ways. So a good example of this is with Coca-Cola. We did some work with Coca-Cola, and they asked us this question. We want to find out how people are talking about Coca-Cola. And we actually pushed back and said, well, what does that really mean? What are you actually really after? And then what it turned out was that they'd just done an advertising campaign. This was actually around the Super Bowl. And they want to actually see, has that campaign actually affected how people talk about Coca-Cola? Okay, so that's what they really wanted to know. Obviously it folds into the top level question, but that helps us work out what data we actually need to get. We now know we need to get data from before the campaign, maybe during the campaign and after the campaign, and then we can see what's changed. So getting the right question is really important. Another example is, you might say how are people discussing my brand, but what you actually want to know is what sets my product apart from my competitors. Okay, so it's not just about how they're discussing my brand, my products, but also how they're discussing my competitors' products. Okay, so again, delving down and trying to work out what you're actually trying to find out. Another one we get asked about is, what does my actual market care about? And again, that's really broad. What do millennials care about? That could be anything. And again, tying it down to what actually you really want to try and find out is really important. So in this case, it could be what you really want to find out is you want to basically make sure that your messaging resonates. Okay, so if you're I guess a makeup company, then what you really want to find out is how do millennials talk about makeup. Okay, so again, it's just delving down and refining your question. So I've given you a bit of a whistle-top tour of what we do and why language is important. And as a result of going through all of this, hopefully you've seen that, language is really important, especially if you want to try and engage with people. And it's not just about in the marketing world, it's in any type of world where you are communicating or engaging with someone else. Getting the language right is really important. Language also provides a really great source of insight in order to help you work this out.